Well, as you probably know, we've reported many times on the, I would say, incomparably repressive censorship regime that Brazil has implemented in the last 2 years, at least incomparable when compared to other ostensibly democratic countries. Obviously, lots of other countries have followed suit, in part by using Brazil. The EU has an incredibly pro-censorship law. So does the UK, so does Canada, so does Australia. And obviously, there's a lot of different attempts to bring it to the US so that there's that First Amendment barrier, thankfully, that makes it difficult but not impossible. The EU had Brazilians come all the time to conferences on free speech and explain how they are censoring and what the justification was for the framework and how it worked. And it was all implemented not by Congress. Congress never voted for this power. They tried to get Congress to give the courts the power to censor the internet in the name of combating fake news and disinformation, all the usual rationale for allowing governments to censor dissent online, but the Congress failed to implement it. And so the Supreme Court just said, I don't care, we're going to do it anyway. And they just invented powers that allowed them to censor the internet. And they were said at the time, don't worry, this is only for the election, the 2022 election. We have to guard against fake news for the upcoming 2022 election, where Jair Bolsonaro, who the Brazilian establishment hates, was trying to be reelected against Lula da Silva, who in the past the Brazilian establishment has also hated, but in this case, they let him out of jail as a result, in part of our reporting, in 2019, because they knew that he was the only person who could beat Bolsonaro, which he did by a very small margin in 2022. And the Supreme Court used these censorship powers all throughout that election to censor pretty much anything derogatory being said about Lula. You weren't allowed to call him a thief, even though he had previously been convicted of corruption, a conviction that was nullified. But, you're allowed to say, oh, I think there's evidence that this politician stole. Pretty much anything that you wanted to say about Lula, the Supreme Court would intervene and say, we demand this be removed from the internet. They would force public social media platforms to block some of the most largest and influential social media accounts, including members of Congress who were supporting Bolsonaro. It was just a massive censorship scheme. And they said, oh, but don't worry, the minute the election is over, the day after the election is over, this power is going to disappear. And yet it didn't. It's continuing to this very day. We've reported on how the secret orders function. This one judge, Alexandre de Moraes on the Supreme Court, he'll send an order to Twitter and Facebook and Google and TikTok and Telegram and Rumble. And I'll say, you are hereby required within the next 48 hours, within the next 2 hours, he gives them 2 hours, to ban all accounts of the following people. And he says, this order is secret and you're required to keep it a secret. We were able to get a hold of one of these secret orders in the beginning of 2023. We reported on the show. It was unbelievable. It just has lists and lists of people who are required to be banned. None of them were charged with any crimes. None of them were notified even of the issuance of this order. None of them had any due process to contest it. We reported all of that. And from there, he's become a much more controversial figure. He has imprisoned a lot of Bolsonaro's associates.